Welcome to Coach's Corner, everybody. Thanks for watching the show, the podcast. I'm your host, Paul Tripoli. Coach Trip to my players, where I'm back in the arena now after 6 years out. PHS, can't wait to get on the field every day. Got a special guest today, folks. Founder of Tighter Insider, Rodney Orr. Rodney, man, I don't know. I got so many questions. Thank you for joining the show today.
Yeah. You know, Paul, you have questions. I have memories. My memory is when we both had dark hair. How about that?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. We had dark hair back then. You're a friend of a couple friends of mine, mainly Billy Getchell. So I remember seeing you around the complex quite a bit. Let's start from the beginning, Rod. Let's start. You were born in Mobile at 6 years old. Your dad got transferred to Corpus Christi. Talk about your mom and your dad and your brothers, Don, Dalton, and God rest her soul, your sister, Brenda.
Yeah. I appreciate you mentioning her too.
Yeah.
We moved to Corpus Christi in 1966. As you mentioned, I was 6 years old. My dad got transferred to the Corpus Christi Army Depot out there. And in our neighborhood, there was a lot of people from all over the country who had been transferred in, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Missouri, New York, all over, and I think everyone was kind of like really proud of where they were from, But you ask about my brothers and my sister. My brother, Dalton, of course, he's been in business with me now going on 28 years, TighterInsider.com. My brother, Don, was the one who first told me about Alabama football back in 1966. And, of course, my sister, Brenda, she had a great influence on my life as well. And all of my siblings had a great influence on my life in one way or another, some form or fashion. Of course, my parents had great parents. My dad, he grew up in a very difficult time in the 30s. As you know, it was a very challenging time back in those days. And he overcame a lot of adversity, worked really hard. And my mom was just a loyal, faithful, honest woman who was a hard worker. And she always told me one thing, Paul, if I forget everything else she said, I'll never forget this. She told me, no matter what, always tell the truth. No matter what, always tell the truth. And, Paul, I think about so many things throughout my life. You talk about my parents, my siblings, and all of that. I think about the seeds that were planted in me that I really didn't realize were seeds back then. Right. And you know what? I think sometimes even like my siblings didn't realize they were seeds. But I think all of the things that you say, it's the power of words. And I think that's the one thing, from my family, from my siblings, and from my mom and my dad that I really think was most important and influential things in my life growing up.
Right, absolutely. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Rod. Your brother Don, when the kids were making fun of you being from Alabama, your brother Don told them they were just jealous because Alabama just won back-to-back titles. Should have won it in '69 when they went undefeated. Yeah. But that was your journey. Talk about high school. Talk about the sports you played and how, you weren't really focused. None of us probably were too much on academics, but you had to go to alternative ed after high school.
Yes.
And, then you got to Alabama in 1982 in the fall of Coach Bryant's last year. Talk about that transition.
Yeah, like I said, my brother in 1966, you kind of touched on it, all the things they were saying about us being from Alabama. We're not very smart, Paul. We just weren't very smart, and they called us a lot of names, all this stuff. And my brother told me about Alabama football. It's kind of created an identity in me at that time, and I became a huge Alabama fan. Every time Alabama won a game, it made me feel good about myself, and I think it was really important. It was really important for me for Alabama to win games. So it created an identity for me that kind of carried on. You talked about into high school. I went to a really big high school, King High School there in Corpus Christi. A lot of great friends still from those days. But a lot of them didn't even know my name at first. They just called me that guy, that Alabama guy, So like I said, it became my identity. My dream was to go to school at the University of Alabama. As you mentioned, I was not a very good high school student, didn't really apply myself. But I would say every day, Paul, again, we're talking about the power of words. I would say every day, one day I'm going to go to school at Alabama. One day I'm going to go to school at Alabama. And my friends would say, hey, Rodney, don't you think you need to finish high school first? So, it was actually my senior year, and I tell in the book, I got in a little hot water for skipping a lot of school because we only lived 15 minutes from the beach. I'd go to the beach a lot, skip school and all this kind of thing. And I ended up short of my hours to graduate and ended up in alternative ed. But I went to a junior college, got my credentials to transfer to a big university. And actually, Paul, tell you this story. Me and my parents in 1981, we traveled from Corpus Christi over here in July to Tuscaloosa. I was going to go through orientation. I was going to enter school in the fall of 81 here. And when we left Corpus Christi that morning, I was all set. And when we got here, I said, man, that's a long drive, man. I cannot go that far. I mean, I had such good friends. I didn't want to leave my friends behind. So I decided, no, I can't go to Bama. So my friends convinced me to go to school at the University of Texas. I had to wait a year or so. Anyway, the plans just kind of fell through suddenly. And it just, in a snap of a moment, I ended up making that decision. But you know what, Paul, it really wasn't a snap of the decision. It's where I always wanted to go, was to Alabama. So in fall of 82, I ended up in Tuscaloosa at Alabama. As a dream come true. And, like you said, I was here when Coach Bryant, I would have never dreamed that was going to be his last season. As you know, Paul, there were a lot of high expectations that year. Alabama was a preseason favorite to possibly win the national championship, and it all fell apart. But yeah, that's how I ended up at Alabama, and is the rest is kind of history.
You've had such a passion for I mean, an intense passion for it. And I always tell everybody, if you want to, do something you love, you got a passion for it, it's so much easier to work hard at it. And you have to write down your goals and look at them. Mark Romero, a good friend of mine, thinkpoz.org. He's one of the #1 school presenter in the country, in the world, actually. And he's a big believer in writing down your goals and helping you achieve them and see them every day. Titerinsider.com was actually your brother Dalton's idea. The genius, the IT behind it, but he was a believer in you and you were a believer in him. And I'm going to tell a story a little later on about what Kirk McNair said to you when you were got an offer on your business. But talk about Dalton and talk about that transition in the early 1996. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First of all, let me say this. My brother Dalton, who's my oldest brother, he's 12 years older than I am. He was a very outstanding student. And he always encouraged me to focus less on Alabama football and more on, trying to be a good student, to prepare for my future. But he thought I was wasting my time. He was obviously, he liked Alabama, was a fan of sorts, but he just felt like it was secondary, whereas it was my obsession. So what happened was he knew my dream, and my dream was to someday cover Alabama. And, in the 90s, early 90s, 93, 94, I kept talking about it. But, by that time, Paul, I was in going near my mid 30s, and I had, a wife, we had 3 kids, then later a 4th one. And it seemed like it was an impossibility. It's an impossibility. But I want to say this about my wife while we're at this point.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, I had the greatest Christian wife, I could have dreamed for. And she always believed that it was going to happen. This dream was going to happen some way, somehow. And she continued to tell me, the doors are going to open. I don't know how, but God's going to open these doors. Well, my brother Dalton suggested the internet. Well, I didn't know what the internet was. He said, well, we'll build a website. What? What's a website? So he kind of told me about it. He said, look, you can reach Alabama fans all over the world for a very low cost. It's low overhead. I'll do this for you. We'll see how it goes. And so in 1996, we began working on TighterInsider.com. He was building the website while I was preparing content to put on the website.
Right.
And we started it. We launched it in October of 1996 from a little small bedroom in Corpus Christi, Texas. Okay. So here I am in a little small bedroom in Corpus Christi, Texas, trying to give information to Alabama fans, right? But fortunately, I had some contacts in the media. Scott Griffin, my old friend, was at WJOX. They had a great radio show, he and Matt Coulter. And,
right.
Scott had me on, and I introduced the website, and it kind of just started taking off, Paul. And within 18 months of that, October 27, 1996, May 1998, I was making more money on TighterInsider.com than I was on my sales and public relations job with Browning Ferris Industries, BFI, the waste management company.
Wow.
And, it was just like it had taken off, man. It was blowing my mind how Alabama fans all over the world were subscribing. And so with that said, one day my wife comes home from church. I'll never forget. It was May 31st, 1998. She comes home from church and she's standing there and she said, "Hey, Rod," she said, I want to ask you a question. I said, "Okay." She said, "What do you think about us putting the house up for sale and moving to Tuscaloosa?" And I'm like, "Andrea, are you crazy?"
Wow.
And she said, "No. Why do you think I'm crazy, Rod?" And I said, "Andrea, we have, there's 6 of us now. We can't just pack up and move for a business that's really still in its infancy. It was only 18 months old."
Right.
And she said, "Rod, it's a major part of your business plan, right?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "It's your dream, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Rod, sometimes you just have to take a step of faith." And, Paul, I had a great sense of peace when she said that. I realized that sometimes in life, you just have to go for it. When your dream's in front of you, you have to go for it. You can't be afraid. You cannot allow fear and intimidation to stop you. And my wife pushed me into my destiny. That's who my wife was. She pushed me into my destiny, and I didn't even realize it at that moment, what she was doing for me and what she was doing for us and the spiritual truths behind what she was doing. And so we moved to Tuscaloosa in 1998. And you know what? All was going well for a while.
Right. Yeah, man. What an inspiration. We're going to talk a little bit about your wife in just a few minutes. That amazing woman. God rest her soul. Touches my soul. It's the book, Bigger Than Bama, folks, is quite a story, an awesome story, a success story that you got help from your family, your wife, God, friends. It all came together. You never stop believing. The persistence is omnipotent. Perseverance is omnipotent. If you just keep plugging along, and mastery of fear is not the absence of fear. You're still going to have it there. Before we talk about your beautiful wife, Andrea, let's talk about 1985 and Scott Griffin. You mentioned him, the sports director at Tuscaloosa at WCFT. He got you started and introduced you to Knox Nunley, who you called one of the most influential people in your life, because you got a little bit of experience before you went to work for BFI. But talk about that early experience, how you cold call that station, how you just kept on persisting that.
Yeah. I did. I started working with Scott Griffin. He told me, he said, "Look, I can't offer you a pay job, but if you want to come over here and learn the ropes," and I was fresh out of college. I'd only been out, 6 months maybe. And I realized, hey, I was applying to all these stations. They're like, "Well, yeah, but you don't have any experience, So I said, wow, I guess I'm going to have to go, see what I can do about getting some experience. And Scott offered me an opportunity at CFT, the local station here in Tuscaloosa. So I kind of learned from Scott a little trick, and that was once you kind of had some stuff on tape where people could see what you're capable of doing, you start making phone calls. Right. And so Scott gave me a directory of all the stations around the country Paul, I started making calls every few nights there at the TV station. I would call, just cold call TV stations. And, after about 6 weeks, I hadn't had any success, but was getting a little discouraged. I make a call to Jackson, Mississippi, WJTV there in Jackson. And Walter Sadler, the news director, answered. And I said, hey, I'm just curious if you've got any job openings. And yeah, he did. He said, I do. He said, I need a tape really quick, though, because we're going to make a decision here very soon. And so the next morning, I just said, hey, to the heck with this. I'm not mailing a tape. I'm driving it over there. So I drove it over there. I met Walter. I caught him off guard. I was really surprised. And he brought in Knox Nunley, who was the sports director. Knox is one of my very, very good friends still to this day. We still communicate. He had been in Atlanta, Dallas, Houston. He had gotten out of TV and was getting back into TV. So he was a really prominent figure in local TV markets around the country. And so I had the great opportunity to work for Knox, to learn from him. And he was a mentor too. I mean, he told me, Rodney, this is the way things are done in the real world. I mean, you have to show up every single day, and he told me things that even though I didn't, again, we're talking about seeds, right? We're talking about things that he planted in me. He just said, look, man, he said, these things carried me later. Okay. They may not have taken effect then, but they did later, the things he told me. And I think it helped me with my business with Tighter and Cider. But yeah, Knox had a big influence on me. I worked there for a couple of years, and then I ended up going back to Texas, Paul. I ended up, actually, I got fired at WJTV after Knox left. And I ended up searching for what I really wanted to do. What is my dream? What is my dream? And I knew what it was. It was covering Alabama. But the question was how to do that. That brings us back to the internet. Right.
Wow. Recruiting's always been a passion for you. That's really, maybe your niche, but that's how you started. You actually, your first big story when you moved to Tuscaloosa was not about Bama, but about Tommy Tuberville. That was your first big break in your story. You always you had contacts. You were doing things that other people weren't doing, and I mean you were one of the pioneers in that. And talk a little bit about one of my old coaches, Coach Ray Perkins. He was hardworking, smart, tough guy. And Coach Perkins would come on my radio show before he passed away and talk about how people that want to get into coaching should minor in psychology. Yeah. Because he realized afterwards what a master psychologist, master motivator Coach Bryant was. And he finally felt maybe he lacked a little bit in that regard, but he was a great coach. Coach Stallings, integrity is beyond reproach from Coach Stallings. Even to this day, I'll call him. He answers the phone every time. I'm a nobody. But I'll tell you a funny story. When Namath was, Coach Bryant was deciding whether or not to suspend Namath, Coach Bryant would poll the coaches and went to every one of them. And back in those days, if you won the bowl game, the assistant coaches would get a bonus. So that was all in for the assistant coaches to let Namath's regression slide because they wanted to win. They come around, almost all were saying that they shouldn't suspend Namath until Coach Bryant got to Babes. And Babes Stalling, who we called Babes. Babes, what do you think? Coach Stalling says, I think he should be suspended. Well, dang it, he's suspended then, Coach Bryant.
Yeah, I remember that story well. I mean, of course, it was a little bit before my time, but I've read about it, yes. Many times. And I did have the opportunity, by the way, real quickly, to go out with Joe Namath through my friend Billy Getchell, who you mentioned. Yeah. That was a good story. It's in the book. I won't spoil it. But anyway, it was a great opportunity to go out with Joe Namath, who was my, growing up, my hero. Again, my brother told me about Joe Namath, and I would have never dreamed I would have gotten to go out with him. But anyway,
right? Isn't that amazing? I mean, we come back to Bama. I went to a banquet one time and sat with him, and he was growing up in New York, New York Jets. He was he was one of my heroes as well. Okay, so the process. Let's talk a little bit about the things in the book that are bigger than Bama. The process of living your dream. Rod, you were neglecting your wife and children. Rod, it takes a strong, courageous guy to admit something like that, my friend. Okay? Unspeakable tragedy hit your family. Thanks for writing in your book, Bigger Than Bama. It's going to help a lot. Shout out to Ray Mellick, by the way.
Yes.
Okay? But, you know, I mean, gosh, I think it was you lost in one day. You lost your son-in-law, stepson, your son-in-law. Vanessa lost her husband and lost her mother in separate accidents, and Andrea. But they were fighting, and your son was battling addiction. I mean, my God, how could it come? You must have felt the world just crashing down on you, Rod. How did you handle that, and how did God help you get through that?
Well, I think sometimes, when these things happen, we look to blame, but I would say out of all of my weaknesses, God gave me one strength, that was to say, what did I do in this situation, in this circumstance that I contributed to, that I could have done differently? How was this on me? And I realized, I knew instantly when I realized that my wife was becoming addicted. This was a 6-year addiction. It was a nightmare. Okay. So anybody that hasn't lived with drug addiction, I can't even put it into words. And I pray that nobody listening has to experience it.
Has to know that. Right.
Yes. So I would say that, Paul, I realized very quickly that I had the wife of my dreams. I had everything in the palm of my hands. And I was, I was emotionally, verbally abusive to my family, or especially to my wife. And when your kids hear that, what does that do? That breaks down everything in the home. I mean, it breaks down trust. It breaks down just the foundational characteristics of the home. Right. And, I did that. And I had to admit that. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and I just said, Lord, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm reaping what I sowed. They say you reap what you sow. My wife, no matter how strong a Christian she was, how much she prayed for me to become the man I was designed to be, I was sowing a lot of anger, bitterness, all of these different things into my wife, into my family. Again, it's a deep conversation, so we can't get into all of it, but just know that that's what happened. And, I realized that, hey, this is something I need your help, Lord, your guidance, your direction through. And of course I prayed, for my wife to be healed, to overcome, and to be the woman that I had known her to be. And, you know what, it just got worse and worse and worse. And, ultimately you mentioned, Vanessa's husband was killed in a motorcycle accident. This was on March the 7th, 2007. That previous month, Paul, throughout February and into March, my wife had 5 car accidents. She totaled 3 vehicles, and she severely damaged 2 others. And it was all related to her drug addiction. And on the night of March the 7th, Vanessa's husband was killed in a motorcycle accident around 6:30 in the afternoon or so. And then an hour and a half later, 2 hours later, Andrea was killed in a car accident, a separate car accident. So we had double tragedy. And at the time all this happened, Brandon, my stepson, who had been a 2-sport athlete at Alabama, he had become a drug addict. He was arrested for drug trafficking. Vanessa had lost her mother and her husband in the same night, as we mentioned. And then our 14-year-old daughter, Natalie, was smoking marijuana, drinking, and threatening suicide. And our little 9-year-old daughter, Madeline, at the time, was, she was questioning whether or not her mother even loved her. I mean, she had seen more in 9 years, Paul, than most people see in a lifetime. And I'm struggling with the hurt and pain of my own. I mean, I'm telling you, a lot of hurtful, painful things happen when drug addicts, they don't do good things. I mean, and Andrea did a lot of really bad things that were very hurtful and very harmful to our family. But anyway, I just remember that, a few days after her funeral, standing there in my kitchen, Paul, looking around, and just, you feel lonely. You feel like it's just you. Right. And I felt like that, and I say this all the time, this is the analogy I've always used. It was like an EF5 tornado had swept through our home. And there's debris everywhere. My whole family's in chaos. And I'm just standing there, and I just said, Lord, I can't do this, but you can. But you can. And I said, I need your help. And, I would say that, he certainly didn't immediately change our circumstances. That's not the way it works. But
Right.
what he did was he showed me the need for transformation in the heart. And it started with me. It started with me. I'm the head of the home. As
Right.
a man, as a husband, as a father,
Right.
we are the head of the home. We are
Absolutely.
directed to be the spiritual leaders. And I had failed at that in my home, and I realized that. But
Mhm.
the Lord was telling me, hey, you know what? Everything my wife prayed for me to become, she told me 2 weeks before she died, Paul. Now, she knew she was getting ready to die. I mean, she knew it. She was a drug addict. I don't think she wanted to commit suicide. That's not what I'm saying. But
Right.
I think she knew in her own mind, she felt like she couldn't overcome where she was.
Right.
And she was going to let it play out. But she told me 2 weeks before she passed away, never forget, she said, I just want you to know something. Everything I ever prayed for you to become, I see it all coming to fruition. I see the transformation in you. And, I mean, sometimes those things, when someone tells you that at that moment, it doesn't really register. The power within that does not register until later. And it
Right.
registered with me later what she was saying, And, I always say this. Yeah, there was a lot of hurtful, a lot of painful, a lot of embarrassing things she did. But, Paul, I want to tell you this. One of the greatest decisions I ever made was 2 months after she passed away. I said, it came over me one day. I need to sit down and start journaling all my hurt and pain to the Lord and
Mhm.
explain it to him. I sat down that first day and I journaled for 3 hours. 3 hours, and it seemed timeless. It seemed like 30 seconds because his presence was there. Okay. And in the midst of that, while I was sharing all this hurt and pain, the Holy Spirit spoke to me. And when he spoke to me, I realized this is reality. God, the Holy Spirit is reality. He's revealing himself to me right now. And when I say that, people say, oh man, you're crazy. No. While I was journaling my prayer, I heard the Holy Spirit say there's truth and there's lies. And I
Mhm.
wrote it down. I wrote it down, Paul. And I said, Lord, this has to be you because I have no idea what this means. And I really didn't. I
Right.
didn't know what it means. And I said, what does this mean? He said, do you remember your wife, that loyal, faithful, honest Christian woman that prayed for you constantly become the man I designed you to be? And I said, yes, I remember her. And he said, that's the truth. And he
Wow.
said, now do you remember all those hurtful, painful, embarrassing, humiliating things that she did on drugs? I said, I remember those things. He said, they were all lies. And,
Oh,
and, and what he was doing was he was showing me her heart. And
right.
that's where
Right.
God sees us. A lot of things happen on the outside, Paul, that God knows that's not our heart.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
We all fall short. We all fall short. Okay. But God knows our hearts. And I knew her heart. And it triggered a memory that she also told me right before she died. And she told me this. And it, again, I didn't understand it at the moment, but she said, Rod, you
Yeah.
got to know this. She said, I never wanted any of this to happen.
Right.
And I'm like, what didn't you want to happen? I didn't want to lose our marriage. I didn't want to break up our family. I didn't want to be in a drug addiction. I didn't want to do all the hurtful, harmful things I've done. I didn't want to do all those things. Okay, but she told me that in the midst of her drug addiction, right? Shortly before she died. But God brought that memory back to me. And what she was doing at that moment was she was telling me her heart, okay? No matter
Yeah.
what she had done to hurt me, she was telling me, or us, or herself, she was telling me she never really wanted any of that to happen. So she was showing me her heart.
Yeah. The truth, showing you the truth.
Exactly.
Seeds planted by influential people, blessings in disguise. We can't recognize it at the time. I've been through a lot in this last year, so I understand you, Rod. But let me read from the book, okay? Because this is important for people who don't really know a lot of times.
Right.
It says, let's see, on page 175, the next 6 months are the most difficult of my life. I spent many hours sitting on the patio, smoking cigarette after cigarette. I've done that. Contemplating our circumstance. It crushed me to thinking the drugs have done to my son and my wife, everything, her beauty, her marriage, her children, ultimately her life. People don't understand drug addiction or have never lived with a person who's experiencing that nightmare. Think that it should be an easy decision for someone to just quit doing something that's destroying the people they love. But you said that a drug addict once explained to you that the drugs steal your soul.
Yep.
I've had my sister-in-law tell me that. I've had other people tell me that, and it's the truth. It's a sad truth, but truth hurts sometimes.
Yeah.
We can't do all the things that we can do. The Lord can do it all. I want to give you a shout out, Rod, again for helping people. When you wrote your book, it's going to help countless people to go through stuff that you've been through. And yeah, thanks for doing that, buddy. I just want to get that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Paul. And again, a lot of people say, well, why did you name it Bigger Than Bama? And I just simply say this in short. Alabama football has been my greatest passion all of my life. I mean, I know it sounds kind of crazy to some people, but, we all have passion, and Alabama fans are passionate, and Alabama football has been extremely passionate to me. But what I learned through all of the experiences that I went through was there's something bigger than Bama. And that's really how I came up with the name of the book, Bigger Than Bama. And now that is my passion, Paul, is what we're doing right here, talking this, trying to encourage other people. And before we get off, I just want to say, hey, if you're a man, if you're a father, if you're a husband, here's what I would have to say to you, because this is really what I learned is, I went through all those years and I prayed to God and I said, Lord, why is it that I didn't treat my wife the way I should have? And 2 weeks later, this word appreciate flashed right in front of my mind. And I said, okay, what is this? And the Lord showed me where he said, you never learned to appreciate. And I didn't. I lost the wife of my dreams. That's been 17 years ago, Paul, and I haven't been able to replace her. Okay. So I say all this to say this, and that is that, look yourself in the mirror. If you're a man, if you're a husband, you're supposed to be the spiritual leader of the home. Look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself the question, do I appreciate? Because if you don't, I'm just telling you that you don't want things to come into your life, into your home, that I know I experienced. Okay. Right. So I encourage every man to become the spiritual leader of their homes that they were designed to be.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Rod. Your son Brandon's doing great.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about how he recovered and did well, and then we'll talk a little football.
Okay. Brandon was actually facing 5 years in prison after his mother passed away. And anyway, he was being held in prison, being held in the local county jail. And I certainly had an opportunity to meet with the judge. And I explained to the judge that he wasn't a criminal. He was a drug addict. And the judge was good enough to allow him to, instead of going to prison, to go to this rehab facility in Iowa. And that was in 2009. Now, Paul, he has Ascended Life Ministries. He travels the world. He just got back from Pakistan, a recent ministry that he had there. Brandon's doing great. He's got a wife and 7 kids now. he's got his hands full, man. I'm telling you. But he does a great job with it. He and his wife Libby. I mean, they do a fabulous job, with their children. And Brandon has a very fantastic ministry. I'm really, proud of him. And I'll say this: my stepdaughter Vanessa, who I raised since she was 4. She and her husband have a magnificent spray foam genie business that they've got 86 locations, I think it is, around the country now. Wow. My daughter Natalie, who was smoking marijuana, drinking, threatening suicide, she now has Southern Vibe Boutique. She's married. She's been married to Chris Barger now for like 10 or 11 years. They have a son that's 10 years old. They have a daughter that's 6. Again, her business is doing really, really well. My daughter Madeline is doing well as also. She has a little boy, Jackson. So they're doing fantastic. Awesome, and God has been faithful. God has been faithful. There was a lot of rough times, Paul. Through those times, raising 2 young girls and having Vanessa going through her stuff and Brandon going through his. I mean, it seemed hopeless, but I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful.
Oh my gosh, yeah. God gives you stuff that you can handle, and you handle a lot, my friend. My hat's off to you. Can't wait to see you this weekend. Coming up this weekend. All right, let's talk a little football. Coach Paul Bear Bryant and Coach Nick Saban, 12 national titles at our alma mater, Rod. Can you
Wow.
believe it? Can you believe we lived through both
No,
of those?
no.
We could tell stories forever, but do you have a favorite Nick Saban story? And then we'll talk about Coach Kalen DeBoer.
My favorite Coach Saban story is just again, it's probably not your typical story. It's just that Alabama football had been down for so many years, as you know.
Right.
Mike Shula was here, and I think Mike did the best he could. There was a lot of adverse circumstances when he took over. But my favorite story is just that the covering of his hiring process when everyone said, no way Nick Saban's coming to Alabama. And I detail it in the book, so I don't want to give it away. Okay. But I had a great personal experience, in that covering that story. Yeah. Because I just knew Nick Saban was the guy, right? Yeah, I knew he was it was funny because one of the assistant coaches under Shula, when they were being fired, and I tell this in the book, he just said, hey man, he said, I want you to do me a favor. When they hire the Messiah around here, you tell them that he's winning with my guys, right? And he never knew the Messiah. That's the exact word he used. And, really that's what Nick Saban kind of was, for Alabama football at the time. Right. So just the hiring process of Nick Saban and the behind the scenes stories that I share in the book.
Coach Kalen DeBoer, a winner everywhere he's been. Latest news on spring practice. What can you tell us about what happened this spring? Everybody's wondering.
Yeah, I'm just really high on Kalen DeBoer. He was really brought to my attention back in the summer when someone tipped me off that said, hey, this might be it for Coach. This might be it for Coach Saban. And I'm like, come on. And no, this time it's a little different. Yeah. And he said, you need to keep your eye on Kalen DeBoer at Washington, which I'd heard of him. I knew of him, but did not know a lot about him. And I started looking at him, 104-12. I mean, what a record the guy has. He goes to Washington. They're 4-8 the year before, and they're 25-3 over the last couple of years. They play for the national championship. Yeah. I mean, it was really impressive, the job that he did there. I'm impressed with him as a person. And again, people say, well, what are the difference between Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer? It really doesn't matter. Everybody's different. There's different ways to skin a cat. Kalen DeBoer doesn't have to do it exactly the way Nick Saban did, right? Right. And he's got his own style, so I appreciate his authenticity, his genuineness, and sticking to who he is. But he's a great guy. I think the players, Paul, the recruits, I think they really relate to him because of the sincerity that he kind of exhibits. So I'm really happy with him. I think he's a winner. You know what? It may take some adjustments. I'm sure he'll learn things about life in the SEC as a coach and how things are done. But I have little doubt that Kalen DeBoer is going to be really successful. And I think that they're off to a good start this spring.
I've read a lot of books on Coach Bryant. I've studied him for 40 years. I'm lucky and blessed to play for him. And then Nick Saban comes along, and I had Mel Moore on my radio show a few years ago. And he told me, Trip, he said, and he knew both of them as well. Right? He knew both of them really well. Obviously, Coach Moore had 10 national championship rings. Yeah. He said, Paul, they don't look alike, talk alike, walk alike, even personality alike. But between the ears and football, they're almost identical. And I'll never forget that when he said that. And great book, Crimson Heart, if you want to read a good book as well. But yeah, Rodney, I can't wait to see you this weekend, man. I hope to see you at the spring game. Everybody go get you a copy. Bigger Than Bama by Rodney Orr with Ray Mellick. Rod, man, what a joy to see you. I can't wait to see you this weekend.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate it, Paul. And like you said, I also want to say again, Ray Mellick did a great job by helping me kind of weave everything together. If people are interested in the book, let me just say real quickly, RodneyOrr.com. That's RodneyOrr.com. Or if you don't remember that, you can always go to Amazon. You find the book there. So if you're interested, it's $19.95.
Go to Tider Insider. Subscribe to Tider Insider. So proud of you, Rodney, for everything you've done. Not just the book, not just Tighter Insider, but how you pulled through in adversity, my friend.
Hey, I appreciate it, Paul. I really do.
Buddy.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks, bud. I'll talk to you soon. We'll see you this weekend, buddy.
Okay, look forward to it. Take care.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
All right. Wow, that was awesome. Stay tuned for these messages with our sponsors. This just wouldn't be possible. Thanks, everybody.
There's a reason why Hill Kelly in Pensacola is the #1 selling Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram dealer between Jacksonville and New Orleans. While other dealers have taken advantage of a competitive market with higher prices, Hill Kelly has discounted prices to the lowest of the year. And Hill Kelly in Pensacola won't surprise you with excessive charges beyond the selling price. Come see why people from Milton, Pace, Foley, Bay Minette, Daphne, Gulf Shores, Mobile, and beyond are driving to Hill Kelly in Pensacola to buy their next new Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, or Ram. At Hill Kelly, the bottom line price and your satisfaction are what really matter. So before you sign, check the bottom line and make the trip to Hill Kelly in Pensacola to see what true local ownership can do for you. At Hill Kelly Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Highway 29 in Car City, Pensacola. Or shop online 24/7 at hillkellydodge.com. When it comes to bottom line pricing, nobody beats a Hill Kelly deal. Nobody.
So hard to get you in the perfect car. Looking for a better car buying experience? With the Step 1 Advantage from Buick GMC, Fort Walton Beach, and Pensacola, receive no-hassle market-based pricing or incentives by pre-ordering. Looking to sell or trade? Our dedicated team will even come to you. Plus, every vehicle sold at Step 1 supports local charities right in your neighborhood. Experience the Step 1 Advantage at Buick GMC, Fort Walton Beach, and Pensacola today.
Hey, Bill, some game, huh?
I haven't really noticed, Paul.
What? The biggest game of the year?
I've been looking over my insurance. Talk about problems I'm trying to figure out.
Well, do what I did. Call the Seiler Agency. They showed me what I needed and what I didn't. They even saved me money. Now, instead of worrying about my insurance, I can worry about the big game.
Contact the Seiler Agency at 476-7443 for all of your insurance needs. Your independent agent for home, auto, boat, RV, commercial, general liability, life, and sound investment strategies. Call 476-7443 today.
Are you riding around in a filthy vehicle? Dirty car no more. Visit Ronnie's Car Wash today to get it shining in no time. They have 3 convenient locations with another coming soon. The unlimited monthly wash packages start as low as $14.95 per month with free vacuums, multi-purpose spray and towels. Visit them in Gulf Breeze, Navarre, Fort Walton, and soon Crestview. Don't wait, wash today. Be sure to see Ronnie's Car Wash on Facebook to see the latest specials and discounts. You'll be riding and shining in no time.
75 years of service and high tech today. It's Pensacola Glass Company at 433-8348. High tech is a term often applied to advanced services and products in today's marketplace. And today, glass is much more than a simple pane of brittle, see-through stuff we hit baseballs through when we were kids. Glass is now a product with unique flexibility in both performance and application. And Pensacola Glass Company is growing right along. That's Pensacola Glass Company at 433-8348.
Barnes Heating and Air is a proud sponsor of Alabama football, serving the entire Pensacola community for over 50 years. Barnes Heating and Air is passionate about providing customers with world-class air conditioning and heating repairs, sales, and installation. Barnes Heating and Air is family-owned, insured, and committed to quality. For a free estimate, call 478-0141. Barnes Heating and Air is #1 in customer service with service calls 7 days a week. Call Barnes Heating and Air 478-0141 and roll Tide.